Let's start. Okay, so we're official now. Uh, well, I'm glad to see all your faces. We have so many choices tonight. I'm glad you decided to come here. It's like if we hadn't done this, Sandy and I would be with Ta-Nehisi Coates at the Cambridge Public Library. It's like, oh, there's so many choices. Um, okay, so uh, I wanted to start off with what I usually start off with is why we're doing this. This was changing our relationship with nature. And I think I say this every time, but it's like, why do we want to do that? Why it's like, why is this so important? And um, so one of my backgrounds is in climate change and being with Sandy, so like really got into social justice and some of the things about the Winchester Farmers Market Community Hub. We're getting into food security and that's linked to poverty and it's like all these issues really at the root of these issues are all have the same uh, cause. And I think part of it goes back to Darwin, and he put the name to it. Um, well, actually, he wrote about a couple of different ways of how nature works, and the people that came after him, the neo-Darwinists, they really hyped the survival of the fittest part, and that really reflects our culture and the effect, and we're seeing the effect of that system, um, and and the effect on nature. But the last few decades, um, people have been starting to understand the other way that nature works that Darwin talked about, which is much more collaborative. Um, the Lynn Margulis started talking about it, and people started noticing from that how nature works together, and you can see that in how um, uh, well in agriculture, how we're so clever and we're creating all these incredible um, super strong plants and chemicals and everything, and somehow nature just finds a way around it eventually. And more recently, the a researcher, scientist, professor out at the University of British Columbia, Susan Samar, she just wrote a book called Finding the Mother Tree, and it's all about how the biggest, oldest trees in the forest are like the mothers of these little saplings, and they basically this are the support for the whole forest. And it's they feed everyone. And it's like another way of looking. And so, well, nature's everything fits together. Everything feeds everything else. There's no real waste. There's no extremes. There is a balance of the competitive, and and the collaboration. And there's a balance of life and death. But underneath it all, there is a benevolence. It's for everyone. It's for the benefit of all. It's like the air we breathe, the water we drink, the earth creating all our sustenance. It's for the benefit of everyone. Humans, animals, plants. It's created an incredible life. And so what we're trying to do at Grow Local is to try to understand that, try to learn how to live like that. And it's such a complicated, vast system, but we have an entry to that right outside our doorsteps, in our yards. It's just, if we pay attention and really care, we will start absorbing what is going on. And part of that process is that we're learning from each other, because we're all interested in different parts of it. And so we're just, okay, this is May 29th. This is what's happening outside now. This is what we're all attracted to. And let's see what we can play with, what we can learn from what we're doing. And so it's the micro and the macro. So we're very fortunate that Linda has donated her yard to use as our playground and our laboratory and our research. And so why don't we get started? Margot and Linda put together a film for what has happened in the last month leading up to now. And then we're going to go to Linda and Prassede talking about what the plan is. And then after that, Carol is going to talk about the next level of composting. So why don't we start with Margot?
So welcome back to my yard. My name is Linda, and this we call the Back 60. This has been the lab demo yard that goes along with the Grow Local for the Planet project, which this is all about. Yeah. So the themes of the project have to do with creating biodiversity and regenerative agriculture, which includes things like minimal maintenance and taking care of the water cycles and the soil cycles and the compost, and being mindful about no-till and where the sun's coming. These are all things I've learned about. I started this project thinking I would get rows of vegetables on my yard, and that was where it started. And let me tell you, this thing has exploded with so much interest and so much fun. Completely complicated, but what we've done with every added piece, which is the fun for me, is every single piece has a reason, and it fits into this larger scale in a way that has been really fun and rewarding and satisfying. So in the month of May, we covered, we prepared is probably the best way to think about May. We built these wonderful raised beds. We've got 5 of them. 2 of them are tall like this and will be for vegetables and such. There's a shorter one, which is for the same theme, but it's for the kids in terms of the the demo and learning and stuff like that. And then these deeper ones are designed to have a neat system called hugelkultur, which means mound culture. For the big ones, we're going to put the mound inside. And then outside, we'll have a mound going along further, which will honor it. To make a hugelkultur, you have to use layers of trees, which we collect from this yard. And then we'll use some soil, which was collected. We've got a whole pile of chips, which also came. All of this will kind of come in and be a part of what these beds were built for. And they're so to just be a little bit deeper on the concepts that we're using with the bed, the idea. Some of the ideas about what to grow coming from the ewg.org website, Environmental Working Group, that identifies the clean 15 and the dirty dozen. Dirty dozen are those fruits and vegetables that are most likely to have pesticides. And so part of the design here was to aim at growing the ones that are most likely to be contaminated if bought industrially. And strawberries is at the top of the list. So our first planting are strawberries, and that's all we've grown so far. But it's kind of exciting. Other things on the dirty dozen list include things like spinach, kale, grapes. We're going to have a grapevine here. Peaches, celeries, tomatoes. There are more, but those are some of the key ones we'll plan to grow. Dirty dozen is matched by the clean 15, and the clean 15 are things that are least filled with pesticides, and those, you can get grown more industrially if you need to choose. So to celebrate part of May, of course, there was Mother's Day, and that was kind of the honorary beginning of planting for the garden. My daughter Laura helped me plant on Mother's Day these strawberries, and they will last through the years. So another thing that we did in May was we had another level tree company and Joe Longi come with his crew and work on the trees. We cut down some trees, we trimmed trees, we pruned trees, we took dead branches, leaving some for habitat where needed. We found woodpecker and his crew up there, which was kind of fun, and collected a lot of branches that we have over in the corner to be able to put into the hugelkultur in our deep garden beds. In addition, we cleared the rest of the invasives that were up high and maybe saved a neighbor's tree from not only invasives, but we had a tree that was invasive in front of it and was blocking the sun. So we're honoring some of our big themes about sun, honoring the native trees that are here and supporting this process at many levels. So June is upon us, and soon we're going to be beginning the next phases. Demetra's crew, Gardens by Demetra, will be coming in and leveling the yard, as well as helping to create a hill over in the corner, which will is entertaining me being called the arugula hill. I've become very attached to arugula through this process. And she'll be helping her crew will be planting the trees and the shrubs that have been carefully selected and curated by Prassede. Also in June, Chris Prince Fencing is coming, and he's going to build, stain, and install horizontal cedar fence around much of the perimeter. We're going to leave this side with chain link. It'll be replaced, but part of the idea is that we want to honor where the sun is coming and getting sun. Two different things. We'll have blueberries and raspberries, grapes along the fence, and then these beds were placed where the sun will be the most throughout the day, and the other trees are all designed to line up with where sun is needed and where shade might be best protected. So here's the best part. Straight from the garden, 20 steps from my house, I get to have my morning strawberries. And since we're in the spirit of feeding for the birds too, I just got to get them before the birds come today. Yum.
Yay.
Okay.
All right. Now, Linda's going to continue with Prassede and talk about what their plans are.
You would tee up the slides, please, Fred? Aha.
Okay, there we go. Is
Thank
that it?
you. Yep, perfect. Thank you. So what I want to talk about now is thinking about the plants that are going into Linda's garden. And I thought about the most useful thing to you all might be to have a protocol for how you can do in your yard, essentially what Linda and I did in her yard, with, I hope, a little more forward planning. We backed into some of the most fun parts of the yard because I'm an ecologist, animal behavior and habitat is like my thing. And I was thinking about feeding all these other creatures. And then I discovered somewhere along the line that actually the Linda household was really looking forward to having a bunch of things to feed people. And so there was a bit of a scramble because we had several things like that. But let's focus specifically on what you can do to feed yourself and others. So the two key things that you must know by now are to use native species and to maximize biodiversity, meaning use as many different species as you can. And I'm here to tell you, and people who have seen my yard know that I'm not kidding, that you can fit in a lot more species than you would believe. And it's very effective. If you want to see how it works best in terms of restoring ecosystem function, you have to watch the film The Biggest Little Farm. I didn't watch it for a long time because I kind of was dreading how it would be. It is the most ecological film you've ever seen, and it shows how humans can integrate farming with other species, including the pest species, and restore the soil. It made me want to dance. It was so inspirational. So this is the mini version of what we can do. And in my dreams, this is happening from Maryland all the way up here. And so while no one of us has 200 acres, if we put enough yards together, we're going to actually make a big difference in improving ecosystem function. So next slide, please. If I put my finger up and ask, then I don't have to say it. Is that okay with you, Fred?
Yep.
So you can get yourself crazy. You can go down many fun rabbit holes thinking about what you need to plant for whom and so on. So I want to give you some broad principles and then give you a bunch of really specific things. Bottom line, you remember the food pyramid or the food web. What you need to do is start at the bottom, which is the real bottom is working on the soil, which Carol has been doing with us, and to work on your plants. And in particular, the two top things you can do, woody structural plants, not just native plants, but start with the big woody plants and then reduce your lawn area. And in both cases, you want the woody plants because they support the most different insects, which are then eaten by other things and which aerate the soil. And because in a lawn, you also want to add more different plants. So you want biodiversity in your woody plants and because they support biodiversity. So you're thinking about this and you think, so what are you thinking about? Well, who do you want to support? So for me, it's all about habitat. For Linda, it's a mix of humans and habitat. When do you expect to use the yard? And then the fun things like, what do you like? What colors do you like? What scents do you like? What do you want to eat? Go to your yard, walk around in your yard. How much space do you have? What's the flow when you walk in through the gate? You don't want something right in front of you. Again, we talked about the soil and you know how to amend your soil. Look at garden books, go to garden centers, go to nurseries. Now you understand I'm giving you the fairly intense version of doing this. You can do a light version, but I'm going to give you the fullest picture and you can pick and choose what works for you. One of the fun things that I did with Linda is to show her a bunch of books with pictures and say, show me the ones you like, and showed her a few different ones. She picked the ones she liked. That's what we went for. And I will give you these same resources. Hobhouse, she's a famous English gardener. She's really good for layouts. Scent in Your Garden, a lovely book, which will help you find the most fragrant everything. Fred? William Kalina, he was at Garden in the Woods for years. He was 30 years or something. He was the guy there. This is a nifty all-in-one volume, which has a lot of useful information. The Natural Garden by Ken Drews, I think he might also be English. It's an interesting twist. He doesn't use native plants, but it shows the idea of a natural garden has been not very popular, and it's really coming into its own. And he was one of the people who first kind of married that concept with whatever plants, not necessarily native plants. It's definitely worth looking at. Fred? This is a series, the Taylor series, and they have one on garden planning, and they have on mosses and lichens, and we're going to be talking, we have been talking and we'll be talking about trees. Today we're talking about woody trees. There's woody shrubs I'll touch on a little bit, and then ground covers and vines. So you can get these. I, of course, own the whole series. I'm willing to loan any of these things if people would like to use them, but they're all still available. One more. This is the Bible, Michael Deere. It is almost compulsively readable, and he has more anecdotes and hardcore information about woody plants in one place than anyone else does. It is still used. It is the go-to reference source. And again, it's available. You can get it if you really want to get into this. So now you have the tools, that set of tools. Fred. So how to organize all this information? Just like Linda had the dirty dozen and the fancy 15, we have, by Doug Tallamy, the top 10 woody plants that you want for butterfly and moth species. We're not excluding bees, we're not excluding any other insects, but this is a group, the Lepidoptera, is an incredibly diverse group that are a mainstay of our ecosystems. So planting trees that are going to attract the most species, we're talking again biodiversity, is a really powerful thing to do. So I thought to give you a list like this will give you something to start with. So the 10 species, the oaks, and this is the number of butterfly and moth species that are supported at some point in their life cycle, is extraordinary. I mean, look at these numbers, 543, 456. Prunus, wild plums and peaches, willow, birch, tulip poplar, the whole poplar tree family, apples, maples, the vacciniums, cranberries and blueberries, alders, and the caria, which are a lot of nuts, including pecans. So I want to talk a little more about these so that you know what you're getting into. I've also included the link for all the documentation around this list, if you want more detail. The species, the tree species on the left that are bold, all occur in the demo garden. We've managed to shoehorn all of those in there, different ones, but they're all represented. And I have, whoops, back up. And then there's some caveats that I think you should know about. Oaks are very ecologically important, but they have a couple of potential drawbacks for the backyard gardener. And one of them is that the leaves are very persistent. They persist in time and they persist in space. So the leaves stay on the trees much longer than the leaves of most other species. And in particular, you can have leaves almost all year round on some of the species. Dry leaves that you might not want. And they also persist on the soil, meaning they have tannins in them which resist breakdown by a lot of the microbes. And so they can be somewhat detrimental to things you plant under them. I think they are great if you put them a bit more on the side or if you have an awful lot of space. The ones that we have in the demo yard are much smaller and sort of shrubby. And I think they're going to allow us to have a bit of everything. So willow, birch, and alder, none of those are represented in the demo yard because they all need more moisture than is there. You can plant stuff like that, but you're going to have to work a lot harder. If you plant things that fit your soil moisture profile, life is going to be a lot easier for you, and you're going to have to do little or no watering once everything's established. And I want to give a specific plug to all those butterfly and moth larvae they're not pests. This is a mindset we have that is very monocultural. Let the caterpillars develop. A lot of them are gleaned from the trees by birds. For example, orioles are right now, the orioles are everywhere. They're having their babies and they are gleaning off of all the apple trees, all the little caterpillars. Most of the caterpillars actually drop from the trees. They don't really have much effect on your trees except in odd years. They develop underground. So you want to help them survive, try and keep your soil soft. Make sure there's some litter on top to keep the moisture in. And I don't use mulch at all. I find mulch to be the ecologically laundered version of plastic sheeting. Not everyone agrees with me, but I don't use mulch. So keep those butterflies alive, and then they get to complete their life cycle. Again, you're doing all of this just because you planted the right species to begin with. You don't have to be running around doing nursery on every one of those 400 species. Fred. So here we are, the back 60, the demo yard. This is when everything's been taken out, and it's taken from a second floor veranda. And my first thing when I looked at this was, oh my God, they need privacy against that neighbor house in the back, and the neighbor wants privacy against the yard. So in talking with Linda and when walking around, this to me cries out for having different rooms or nooks, whatever you want to call them. So the fence that is farthest away from the picture, the one that's marking the boundary with the neighbor's driveway, the left corner of that, the northeast corner, is going to be one substantial nook. It's a 60-foot length, and that nook is going to have a lot of hollies. It's going to be much more private. The nook on the right is the one I'm going to focus on and talk about today because it's the one that we're using as the example of our thinking. But so with each of these nooks and that tree list, and knowing Linda's colors and walking around with her, she was at the nursery one day and I was at home and she was talking to me on the phone and she said, oh, I like this and I like this. And I said, I got you one of those. I got you one of those. Okay, let's get that. So we anchored this in her wanting color and working on that list of species. Next slide, please.
Something's happened. There we go.
Oh yeah, there's supposed to be a picture of the fence here. I guess I didn't get back to that. Next slide, please. Linda mentioned the fence, so it's going to become, so this was one of the trees that she fell in love with. This is an apple, a crab apple. Prairie Fire is the variety. That's going to go in the back left corner that you saw. That's going to anchor that corner. It's going to give shade. You can prune them up so you can sit under them. Next. This is what's going to go in the middle and into that neighbor yard. It's very difficult to find evergreen trees that aren't going to grow to be 70 or 100 feet, which you don't want in a small yard. And many of them, they drop their branches, the lower branches, they self-prune as they age. So where you want the screening, you are going to have bare trunk. This is from Alaska, so it's not the most native, but at least it's American. And it grows very slowly. And in that yard, I would be amazed if it tops 20, 22 feet in the lifetime of Linda and that yard. Next, please. So the left is a Cherokee Brave dogwood, and the right is something that Linda has wanted forever. It's a Japanese red maple. And it's going to be a very hot corner in terms of the colors. As you can see, these two going together. In spring, it's going to look like this because the dogwood doesn't have any leaves yet, and the maple leaves are red pretty much year round. So that was the anchor for that corner. And the question was then, what do you do with that? And again, next, please. You can make it a very hot corner and keep these colors going with a native rhododendron, with a cotinus or smoke bush, which is also native. And then you can get into perennials. So you pick up the wine red of the maple, you can pick up the pink of the dogwood, and we have a bunch of rhododendrons making a half circle. And these smaller plants will be inside And then up against the fence, there are going to be more berry bearing green, but this is the hot corner. Next, please. So you get to play with color. You get to do whatever you want with color. So using that list, using Linda's likes and the size and shape of the yard and the rooms that we wanted to put in, these are the woody tree species that we put in. You already saw that from, I told you that from the top 10, we had 7 of the top 10. The prairie, you saw the big apple tree, you saw the dogwood tree, fringe tree, witch hazel, a couple of prunes. The 2 in brackets, the 2 in parentheses are maybe hybrid, and the contender peach is probably not native at all. But in the balance, we're doing very well. Fred, some pictures. Next, please. Oh yeah, and then these are the shrubs. And look at the numbers here, okay? We've got 30 woody plants. I mean, these numbers are astonishing. Oh, and these are the sizes. That's the other thing I wanted to say. It was extra fun to do this project because, you know, when you're really on a budget, you're going to have plants that are that big and it's going to take forever. And I mean, Linda and her household decided to go big. So we have all those trees are like 10-foot trees, 12-foot trees. I mean, staggeringly beautiful specimens. And it's going to make the yard look like something instantly. You know, they're going to be planted on the 16th and it's going to be like magic. It's just going to be crazy. So then smaller things, shrubby, hazelnuts, hollies, you know what hollies look like, a couple of viburnum. So the names probably don't mean anything to you. Fred, if you can go on, I have pictures of some of them. This is hazelnut on the right side, your right side. Do you see this where I have the pointer? Is that your right side or just my right side? Anyway, those are the little nuts as they're coming in. And this is what the tree looks like. This is one you need to have 2 because they fertilize, cross-fertilize. Next, please. Viburnum. This is a genus with lots of native, and you see that it's going to give you fall color, and it's got these fabulous berries, and it's incredibly fragrant. The spring flowers are just wonderful. They're starting to come out now. Next, please. This is a fringe tree. Linda's is not this size. We economized some. Some things are not as big as the others, but it's also very native and very fragrant and puts out fabulous fruits for birds in the fall. So you get the caterpillars, you get the birds, you get the nesting sites. There's a lot of ecosystem value here, habitat value. Next. So also vines, partly because the yard is not that big, vines give you 2-dimensional plants, but they want to be 2-dimensional, and you can put them on the fence. So if you don't want to see a lot of the chain link, you can cover it with vines. It also gives you kind of double use of your space because they are so 2-dimensional. 2 in particular, this honeysuckle, Lannister is honeysuckle. This is a native. Mahoney's now carries it because I told them, I don't know, 15 years ago, I said, you've got to carry these. And now they have hundreds every year. It's a very popular plant. You'll see in a minute why. I have a picture. And these are the 3 non-native trees. The big evergreen that's blocking the neighbor's house, the Japanese red maple, and there's a Japanese green maple that I don't have a picture of. Next. But that adds 5 more woody plants. So this is what the honeysuckle looks like, and it will grow. I have it up the 2nd floor. So when I open the windows, I'm in the middle of this scent cloud, and it brings hummingbirds and it brings butterflies, and it's lovely for people. Next, please. Lost track of where we are. Oh yeah, so garden is a perfect metaphor for life because you make plans and you choose things and you work so hard and you sweat, and then all kinds of stuff happens and you have to deal with it. And if you don't like that, then you should stick to interior decoration because you're not going to have fun in the yard. But if you think that's interesting and you'll learn something, then you'll have more fun in the garden. So what are the kinds of things that can come up? Availability of plants. Natives in general, it's not been a big market. People like you are pushing the market, and there are starting to be more of them available. but it's still not the same, nowhere near the availability of general stuff that's around. COVID has made it even more difficult because there has been this enormous increase in people gardening. And since it started last year, for example, fruit trees at Mahoney's, they sold out very quickly last year. And this year, the first day in March that the fruit trees came in, the end of that day, there was not a single fruit tree left. So if you really care, you have to do a little bit of legwork and you have to be prepared to jump when there's something out there. Size is an issue. You either pay for growing time with money and maybe more labor to plant because bigger plants are harder to deal with, or you save money, but you have to spend time. Cost, if you want something big or unusual or rare, is also going to cost more. When I started my garden, I was going through the book and I'd go to Mahoney's and I said, can you get me a couple of these? He goes, I think so. But they were not commonly available. Some of them were very expensive. Some of them were less expensive. So you might have to modify your plans is what I'm saying. There's a bunch of things I would have put in Linda's yard. And if we had started this in November, I could have lined them up, but they were simply not available. There's also disease, elm blight, which has changed the landscape of the United States because it blighted out the entire elm tree population, all the populations. There's invasive stuff that happens. You can have insects like Japanese beetles. You can have adelgid, which is is it a fungus on your hemlocks? Stuff like that is just going to happen. And you want to plant as much diversity, partly so that if you lose something, you're not going to lose everything. If you have enough different plants, some of them are going to be resistant to whatever is going around. There's going to be too much rain. There's going to be not enough rain. And if you have exotic things that need a very particular regimen, that's going to make you crazier than if you have a lot of natives that are used to this kind of back and forth. Plants also die. They just simply die. It's a bad match, or they're just weak individuals. Some things you might hate. You put them in, you thought you'd love it, you hate it, rip it out and give it to somebody. No reason to live with it. And the last and the maybe least expected is that natives aren't necessarily as showy. They have not been selected by marketers to draw you in. They have been selected to bring in pollinators or to have yummy things to eat. So you might have to work a little harder to have showiness, although I picked the pink and wine corner because I wanted you to see that there can be plenty of showiness even with natives. Next. So here you have a protocol. You can do this over for shrubs, for perennials, for ground cover, whatever it is you want to move on to. You get an overview of natives that have good ecosystem function. You ask all the same questions, which are obviously going to be easier now that you've answered them once. You probably still like pink or you whatever. You're going to integrate them with your existing plants. You start with the big woody plants because that's your skeleton, and then you work around that. And you get the plants together dealing with whatever availability issues there are and then modifying accordingly. And then you get to plant. Next. So here's specifics on some of these other things. Shrubs, I'm not going to go through all these with you, but these are among my favorite, most useful links that you can have, I would say. I'm going to point to the last one for a moment. Massachusetts has some stunning resources that they created partly with Mass Audubon, including this one, which is about bird habitat for forest species that are in decline. And it's very big thinking of us that we can create forest habitat yard to yard. And I'm not wanting to go that far, but if you're looking for trees, or if you want to find a ratio of lawn to tree that might be particularly enticing to one of these species, we have 17 species that are particularly endangered here. That would be worth looking at. And it's just a fun read, again, if you're interested in the topic. Next, please. So what do we still have to do in the demo yard? Well, it can go on for a few years. Unfortunately, Linda is very flexible about that. Even this year, after all the big stuff is in, there's a bunch of other shrubs that we want to put in. There's some vines. There are more great plants than you can possibly fit, even I can fit in a 60 by 60 yard. But she pointed out that there's the front and the side, and that has some non-natives, and we can dig those up. Grape covered pergola is worth mentioning because that's a nice combination of human and non-human food needs. There are going to be perennial beds and annual beds, and there are going to be vegetable beds, and those we haven't talked about at all because we're focusing on woody plants and habitat. So my most useful last thought to you is water. Ivan was just saying that the protocol I gave him for his seeds gave him 80% germination. I encourage you deeply to take seriously that all an inch a week. And if it doesn't rain, then you absolutely have to water them. It doesn't have to be, none of this has to be fancy. I really think the main place to spend your money is on the biggest plants you can afford. On the left here is my high-tech bird feeder. This is Rubbermaid best with a little foot. You have to put a rock in it so the birds have something to perch on. And a spray feeder, a sprinkler like on the right is a big boon, not just for plants, but also for animals. I've seen several hummingbirds sitting inside the cells of my chain link fence as this goes over them, or robins and other birds on the lawn or up in the trees. It's a way of putting water into the habitat. And we're lucky in New England that we have a lot of water. So I encourage you to share it generously. It keeps your soil moist, which means that all those creatures in the soil are going to survive too. And not typically in New England. Fred, next slide. It's a live link. Can you hit that link? I won't spoil it. I won't tell you what it is. If he gets it up, that's great. And if not, then you will have to look at it on your own. This will be posted, and I will make a PDF of this and post it too, which I hope keeps the live links so that you don't have to read. You can read it instead of watching the whole presentation. And again, I encourage you to watch The Biggest Little Farm. So thank you, Linda. Thank you, Margot. Thank you, Fred. And questions to me, to Linda? We were talking about how we backed into things, but questions. You have questions? I see a bunch of stuff in chat. So where did I shop? I shopped a bunch of places. So I get a lot at Mahoney's, and I have a commercial account there because I've been doing this for people for a while, and because they're very client oriented and very friendly and very knowledgeable. Some of those people have been there as long as I've been gardening in Winchester, which is 30 some years. So that's a kind of connection local that I really appreciate. Weston Nurseries, Hopkinton, has really big plants, sometimes much bigger than Mahoney's. The really big plants, the big red maple, the big false cypress, those came from Weston Nursery. Everything else, no. And then they Weston had some fruit trees when Mahoney's was all out of fruit trees. They tend to have a bigger base. So that's been a good one. And then I have a bunch of esoteric little places that I like to go to for offbeat things. And I do some online shopping, bare root, hazelnuts. You can't find hazelnuts this year either. And I tried a bunch of places and ended up buying hazelnuts from Etsy. And they sent me a bunch of bare root hazelnuts, which thrilled me because we have hazelnuts. Other questions? Fred, are you reading the questions? Should I read them aloud, or what are we doing?
Why should you read them?
I should read them? You read them. Links.
How many questions do we have?
Was a question on woody plants, but I think you've defined, sort of asking what's your definition of a woody plant, Prassede?
Well, there's woody trees and there's woody shrubs, meaning that it has a wood part that persists year round. Perennials are non-woody plants that will die back in winter or disappear under the snow, and the woody plant will persist. So holly, roses, maples, those are all woody plants. Do you have something in mind that you're wondering if it's one or the other?
Well, when you spoke about woody plants, I was thinking of epimediums. I was like, oh, and I guess those are not woody, right?
They're not woody, correct. They're
Okay.
perennials. And a
Okay.
good plant, they do very well under trees.
Yeah.
There's a question, sorry about the phone, that will end. Links, the links will be posted. To keep raccoons, skunks, and woodchucks out of the raised beds. Fred, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so they're like, you can try chemical type things like fox urine, stuff like that. They only work for a short time. You can try fencing. If you get really desperate, you can try electrical fencing. August Westner, he had problems with that, went on and he hooked up a solar panel electrical fence, and that helped. So that would be the best way to do it.
A nice thing? Yeah.
I mean, can you plant, I mean, if they're eating something, can you plant something that they don't like, or they don't like the smell, or are there some plants keep certain animals away?
Yeah, but you
Alliums, don't they keep, oh, is that what they call them? Alliums?
Allium?
Allium, yeah.
yeah,
Keep rabbits away, right?
Not
So-
necessarily.
No? I just
Yeah.
read that somewhere. so-
yeah, it'll deter them for a little while, and then they just, they get hungry.
They just hold their nose and go in.
Yeah.
So, Prassede, your method, I mean, I was just amazed at your method because I looked at Linda's yard, and that's just incredible. I mean, Linda, you just went bare.
Well, yeah, we
What was-
cleaned it out on purpose. I mean, there wasn't that much there, but if you watched previously, there was just junk all around. I mean, the truth is we spent 20 years raising kids and having swing sets and whatever, and then never did it. And so it's exciting to have a plan and an intention and be able to do the design on purpose, but have a blank slate to work from.
I know I mean, you're brave to begin with, but then
Yeah.
you bought into a vision that Prassede is sharing with us. And I'm just wondering, Prassede, did you put that on paper? So did you, I mean, landscaping is such a big art. So how did you bring that all about?
So I'm not sure which part you're referring to, but basically, I heard Linda I think it was the very first meeting, offer her yard, and I was thinking of offering mine, but it's not as much fun because it's been 30 years in the planting, whereas with Linda's, we can see it happen it's more vivid. What you just said is it's very vivid. So I said, are you serious about that? And then we talked a little bit, but pretty much I did what I outlined here. I mean, I brought her trees. We talked about trees. We talked about color. We talked about what she likes. And then I went to Mahoney's, and it pays to go off often because they get new stuff in all the time. And then I would send her pictures. And then, in fact, why don't you tell the story about how the red maple moved from one corner of the yard to the other corner of the yard?
That is the question I was going to ask you, because I mean, when you go with a big tree and you situate a big tree, you're stuck with it. But you just said you moved it around, so that's great. That's
We
awesome.
moved it around in our minds.
Well, and in fact, she sent me to a couple of nurseries, which
Right.
was just delightful. I mean, I would call back and be like, I'm in a candy shop here and it's my kind of candy. It was really fun. And the red maple moved a couple of times even in the nursery, because she sent me to see one and I fell in love with a different one. And at one point she said, that's not the one I meant, but that's fine, you know. And what was so beautiful was sitting under the one we got, it just spoke to me, you know, it just, the way the branches branch at the bottom instead of more of the lollipop kind. And then looking up from underneath, it was just this beautiful sparkling array of the sun coming through. I was like, okay, this one. And we had even picked one at Mahoney's that we ended up releasing back to the public. So there's really this sense of an accomplishment at every step. You know, what I meant in my introduction about how each item is curated for not just for purpose, but for every element of it, you know. And it's the same thing as celebrating each child for what they're here for, right? They don't have to accomplish some external criteria. We're going to bring them to life for who they are. And so, yeah, we had the design for it to be in one corner, and then just the back and forth. And my gratitude to Prassede so much for being able to modify, you know, what am I looking for? What I was looking for kept changing too. In fact, I'm reading Braiding Sweetgrass, and I have yet to tell Prassede I want to plant some sweetgrass. I mean, that's just how it's been. It's like, oh, I remember my mom had this dogwood story. Okay, well, she says she already got me a dogwood. Oh, well, my mom used to be able to pick 4-leaf clovers out of a crowd. Can we have clovers? And then I get that story. So it's just, so in the end, you know, the thought of bringing kids around to teach about biodiversity. I'm a child psychiatrist, for those who don't know, and being able to tell the stories and give a tour that includes, you know, the caterpillars and who do you think's eating this and what do you think's there. And, you know, I saw in the hugelkultur stuff in the exploring this morning when I woke up, that you can put a glass, you know, window pane against the side. And I'm like, yeah, let's do that. In fact, Prassede, I hadn't told you that I want to do a hugelkultur outside of the beds, you know. But we'd already talked about.
So you can put a glass so you can see the organisms. Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah,
wow.
Right? Like, why not?
That is amazing. Yeah.
So honoring those pieces and celebrating, like neighbors have said, you know, the blueberries are going to be eaten by the birds. And I'm like, well, that works. Let's just have enough berries that I get some too. You know, because
we have 4.
right. We're here to feed them. And I'm on the path for the elementary school. So if kids come by and eat them on their way to school, right, I'm glad they're not poisonous. Let's make sure we keep it safe for everybody. But that's not against the plan. That's with the plan, you know.
And it's a nice part. And when you say that, it sounds, you know, a normal person saying that. And so people can't think it's just me and that I'm crazy about these things. But the process part and relishing the process. And then you look at it and you think, but that tree belongs over there. Or I go to Mahoney's with literally leaves or petals and blossoms and think, I need something that's going to go with this. And you see so many colors there that you get completely overwhelmed and you think, was it this? So you got to bring it with you. And then and if you enjoy that, it's like a big puzzle, and it's a living puzzle, and there's nothing, you can't really do anything wrong. And if a plant dies, it's not the end of the world, and you figure out why, and then you put something in that isn't going to die, you know, whatever. But it's very different from decorating your living room, because when you decorate your living room, it's going to stay like that. And if you need it to stay like that, then a garden might not be your first choice. And if you just want stuff put in there, that's fine too, and you can hire somebody to do it. But I think the idea, the pleasure of gardening and the belonging and the connection is that you put in that thinking and that effort. And I like to do it with people. I mean, Linda's a wonderful person to work with because she doesn't have rigid ideas. Birch? No. So that was the phone conversation again. She says, oh, dogwood. And I say, yeah, I have that. Oh, flowering crabapple. Yeah, I have that. Birch? No, too dry. And so that was how it went for 40 minutes, maybe. Yeah. And some people will go, but I want a birch and I have, you know, money and I want a birch. Well, okay, but that's going to be a lot more work for you. And you should buy another property and put the birch where it's wet or something. So you work with it.
Right. And I'm so clear about the wanting it to be low maintenance. That doesn't mean I'm not willing to, like when we had the whole theme about the glyphosate And do we use the chemical, or do you take the time to every year or every however often somebody tells me you have to go and clip to avoid the glyphosate? Okay, that's a good enough reason for me. But what I was learning about the hugelkultur is part of why the taller they are, the more you may never have to water them, because the lower things will absorb the water and then have it available. So people talk about, oh, you're gonna have the sprinkler out there so much, you're gonna waste so much water. That's not called waste anymore, right? Because it's going into the sponge of the soil, which Carol will talk about. You know, it's so nice not to waste water. But if you're, you know, we've seen the water cycles from even, I mean, I'm learning every time from other Zooms about like, oh, that's why, and you'll see this on the Biggest Little Farm movie too, when there's a rainstorm for days, many farms will be washed out, and the Biggest Little Farm is like soaking it up for the next time and can handle it. It's got the built-in resilience. And so it just sort of makes sense all over again. By the way, we were joking. I really do recommend the Biggest Little Farm. Prassede texted to me and I watched it by that evening, and I already sent it on to other people who might be interested. And so in my mind, in the back, you know, sometimes it's called the back 60, but it's also the Biggest Little Farm. And we don't really have big animals, but
the part about that I love so much is the integration into the ecosystem. So the coyotes and the groundhogs and the owls and the whatever, and the snails and the ducks and the chickens, and they find a real balance. And it's obviously very hard to do that. Impossible to do that on some scale in a yard. But again, the idea that we can be so much a part of the natural rhythms and species rather than impose from above and destroy. And it's so powerful. I mean, it's just such a powerful thing. I feel that we really have an ethical obligation to do this. And the more we can help each other make it happen, the better off we'll all be.
That we're talking about, and we go to the micro with Carol.
Okay, so we're going to switch to Carol now. We are just to let you know that a week ago, some of us here were part of a conversation on the Biggest Little Farm over at the Jenks Center, which was a great conversation too. But now for back to more elemental topic. Carol's going to talk about the compost, and then if we can get back to this later.
So I've gone to a ton of webinars and conferences and what have you over the last few months, and I've had a ton of friends and neighbors and what have you ask me for help with their compost. And key thing I'm realizing is there's a gazillion different ways to do it. And this is a great little map, and it's probably a little hard to see, but how to do it, it really depends on you personally. You know, I love this. It's like, what do you think about worms? You hate them, okay? Then don't do that. But if you love it, especially if you have kids, that might be a way to get them into it. So actually, one of the key things I thought of when I went through all this was we could probably deep dive into, if there's a handful of people that do each type, then deep dive on those, because there's definitely overlapping principles, but once you get into each type, then what you add to it, the caveats and the limitations get more specific. So, you know, like for instance, whether or not you choose, if you really want it simple, you just put it in a heap, but there's a lot of complications if not many people in the urban area do it in just a open heap because you're concerned about attracting rodents or what have you. But out in the country, I've come across plenty of people that still do it that way. But one of the key things I realized is, because I've seen a fair amount of mistakes, and just because we need to go back to the basics. I actually came across this book the other day and I thought it was wonderful. So the key thing is there's 4 key things you need. You need the browns, which are carbon-based, which are things like leaves and woody materials. And you also need the greens, which are nitrogen, which is grass clippings
That's
and food
exactly what you
scraps
do.
and manures. But some of the key things here is like manures. You really should just stick to, for your own with chicken manure. Definitely not pet manure. And you could buy compost that has cow manure in it, but you have to keep in mind your neighbors, because on a rainy day, sometimes certain ones that are just a high percentage cow manure, you have to know your neighbors. So it's really depends. And the other key thing is you have to have air and you have to have water. And what you hear over and over again in regards to water is that it needs to be as wet as a wrung out sponge. So, and that totally depends on where you have it located, where, and how you manage it. And same thing with the air. And a key thing that the inoculants will help with is to add the microorganisms. So the key thing is, if you're in an area that's not as urban and you don't need to have a floor on your compost container, then, and you have a relatively healthy soil, you automatically get a decent amount of microorganisms, looking up kind of like fish, they're looking up and say, hey, look, there's food. So they'll go in and they'll help. But the inoculants become very important in the urban areas where you have enclosed cases, and it's difficult to add the extra inoculants. But I've seen in numerous places that add a really good high quality, grab a bag of finished compost and layer that in. And again, you don't need to do that if you have a floor to it. Let's see. And this is a 6-minute video, but I think I'll skip it for now and suggest that you all check it out. Kiss the Ground is really diving into all this. You might have seen the documentary Kiss the Ground, and it actually it ties in fairly well everything that we've been saying here, and how important it is, and how yeah. And so here, again, please always keep the basics in mind. It's such a powerful thing to keep the food scraps out of your regular trash, and it's layered in regards to where you are. If you have a gazillion leaves, you really don't need to have as much of the ripped cardboard or the paper. But at the same time, and you can recycle it. But at the same time, both of those can be very powerful, and you might want to mix it in, because the key thing I learned is even if you just have leaves and grass clippings, it's good to add the extra, because it's extra nutrients that they don't have. But whoops, the key thing, it feeds the soil, it helps prevent soil erosion, and also it keeps the water there. It's a valuable resource. That's one of the things that the Kiss the Ground says. It's like, what are we doing throwing it into a landfill, especially the one that's trapped in there? And it's incredibly valuable. So there was a key webinar that I saw in regards to talking about the difference in the quality of your compost. So that's another thing to be careful of. But it seems most places are pretty decent with the quality. You'll see more that look more like this on the right. In fact, Mahoney's uses more local materials in their own brand, and they add biotone, and it includes mycorrhizae fungi. So I've been throwing that in my enclosed bin because I had to put it on a sandy lot that I had to block it I can't have access to the soil. But the key thing I noticed with the three major things that I was looking into, including this really high quality book, really short book, well, relatively book, it's like 100 pages, from 1991, where it basically said there's hundreds of compost starters, activators, inoculants, but there, if you have access, if your compost has access to a healthy lawn with all the microorganisms, you don't necessarily need it. He said, but actually there is one, and it's the Dr. Pfeiffer biodynamic one. And the same thing is said in this webinar, and the same thing from another set. The Vermont had a whole set of webinars all week for International Compost Week. So I'll show you pictures later, but I bought some of that and I'm going to be trying it out. So this is how Institute for Local Self-Reliance, this is the posters I use. They're really great at supporting compost, and more reminders as far as when you really feed what's going into your compost, you get very, very diverse microbes. And so on the other side, you might come across this type of compost, because it's very, I was so thrilled to see that in Vermont, the transportation, the highway system is getting away from using mulches, and they're literally planting more plants that have deeper roots, and they're using a lot more compost instead of mulch, because they realize that it helps with the retain the water and helps with the soil structure, so that it actually reduces the amount of money they have to spend on maintenance, and that it also reduces droughts and floods. So it net saves them money, but at the same time, you might come across this more often because the highway, it's getting popular for that purpose. They're going to add this extra coarse stuff, which could be good, but this is usually the best for more urban areas. And one of the, like an indoor way to do it is bokashi. I really like the way they described about composting, because again, it's best to always go with the basics. And it's an indoor thing, so they definitely need to have an inoculant. So if anybody happens to be going down the Bokashi Road, I have more information, but again, stepping back to the basics, compost is the process of aerobically decomposing organic matter. So it's with oxygen. Microbes need air and moisture to do their job, and they create heat as they work. So a purist, you would have plenty of air and water. So you'll see people will flip with pitchforks, or with, there's different timings, again, depending on what is in your compost. And let me see. Here's a key thing to keep in mind is, how soon do you really want to have your compost? There's plenty of things you could do to break it down from 2 years to 30 days. And the inoculants will definitely help on that. But some people just want to just let it sit. And again, with, what can I compost? Backyard compost, you really should be careful on meat, dairy, bones, and citrus. But at the same time, citrus, this is an example I was going to mention later, is so often you'll see each posting kind of get not as clear as they should be. So citrus, it depends on the percentage. That is exact. And in fact, I'm starting a list of things that you need to be careful of, but it doesn't mean you should not include it. So, and The other key thing with some of the more technical stuff is the process can be relatively expensive, but there's plenty of other indoor systems that might not be as expensive. Institute for Local Self-Reliance has this awesome webinar. And again, there's just so many different possibilities for you. Some people like the tumblers, but once it gets full, it's really difficult to turn. So you need to make sure you have someone that's going to be able to help you with that. But that can help with the air. But again, it's not on the ground, so you might want to consider adding some type of inoculant. And then here's another, huge variety. If you want wooden structure, it depends on, kind of like the indoor interior decor. It's like, what look do you want? And actually, I came across this a number of times when I was helping people. It's like, no, you can't just throw it in randomly. It's best to be mixed together, especially because the nitrogen gets the hottest and is the one that really starts things to cook. And it could be just, it's best to work for it all to work together. And grass clippings, they over and over say to be very careful to not have too high of a pile, because it'll get to be a mess, and that'll be something that will stink. The key thing with composting is you hear some bad stories on it stinking. It's because the person didn't fully understand their process. I've done composting different ways, and the first few months it was stinking until I learned the process, and then for years, no problem. So, and a lot of towns are starting to give big discounts, because they're all waking up to the fact that getting trash out of their, getting the food scraps out of their trash, it saves them a lot of money. So in fact, the one in the top middle, well, actually these two are some of the most popular ones. And the key thing, they're adding air holes on the side. So back to the high-tech way to do it, and also they set up systems. See how the moisture here? There is just a mind-bogglingly elaborate on testing to see how moist it is, and some people are like, I don't want to bother checking, and so they have systems to do it. And then some people put in PVC the pipes to help with the aeration, so you don't move it around as much. And it's, it can get really, really involved. And another thing to keep in mind is, in a sense, farmers are really waking up to how important compost is. But as you can imagine, hundreds of thousands of acres, you can't really just pour a bunch of finished compost on it. So they're coming up with more compost teas. And actually, so I'm trying to figure it out so that I can figure out the nuance. So, because I've gotten upset when I see people spraying on the farms, you just assume it's pesticides, but more often now it's actually going to be the inoculants, as they're really, Cargill is even waking up to it. This is one of a gazillion different lists, and I've been just amazed at how drastically different some of these lists can be, especially with not having caveats. But this one is definitely one of the better ones. I like the fact that paper bags. I saw somebody that literally put a paper bag in their compost, and they wanted it to be done in like 3 months. I'm like, ain't gonna happen. Yeah, it because actually, how people use cardboard to actually stop weeds. So you're kind of stopping things, but it's amazing. I actually even shred mine. And where I'm at, it's hard to keep the moisture in it. So what I do is I have the pasta water. I will put my shredded, high quality shredded paper and cardboard, and I'll soak it in there. So that's the way that I get more water into it. Because you can do anyways, I could go on and on, obviously. But a key thing to notice is for paper products, try to avoid heavily inked paper products. I have a list later on as far as the top mistakes I see. I see they say, oh, go ahead, put junk mail in, just not anything glossy. I actually saved my junk mail for a couple of weeks, and I found that I only was able to put in like 30% because there was so much of it is glossy these days. And some of the windows is made from a better material, but it's like impossible to figure out. I've come across materials that literally will say whether or not it's compostable. And I really think we should push for that to be, instead of us just standing there, it's like, I have no idea, because there's so many other reasons and priorities for packaging. Compostables hasn't been one of the top priorities. So actually the other key thing that I bought is a compost thermometer, and it will help you know how fast your compost is going. You'll obviously see it as it starts shrinking, but it's just been fascinating to really see how often it goes up and down in these zones. And one of the reasons why, like the meat and the bones and the compostable dinnerware and all of that, it needs to consistently stay up in the higher temperatures. And yes, you'll see your compost go up to the higher temperatures, but often it'll come right back down because you're just really not able to keep it at the consistency. And again, that's I helped a ton with compost collection at different events, and I was always amazed at the drastically different questions people would ask. A key difference in what people would ask is, we would be putting food scraps in, and they're like, you can put food scraps in for the compost? And I'm like, oh, have you just been doing leaves and grass? Yeah. And then on the opposite, tons of people I know, they just put food scraps in their backyard bin, and you need to add some type of paper. And as far as leaves, I really want to help for this fall to really dive down into a good amount of it should just stay where it is. But when you have extra, it's certain, you have to time it right as far as grabbing the side. Do not package it and send it off somewhere else, because if you're going to compost, because mulch it up and put it right in your compost. Again, definitely don't do that if it's in an area that the pollinators and what have you can use. But again, I'd love to have that more of a deep dive in the fall. And I can go into real detail on the different, what happens at each zone, but rather jump on to other ones. But occasionally they say that you might actually hit over 160, and you need to be careful of that. It actually makes it more interesting. And I actually came across a gal who is helping at a huge property, and they wanted her to help on the composting, and they have huge, like 20 huge stacks, 6-foot-high stacks of leaves and grass clippings, totally different mixes. And we literally went around and stuck the thermometer in, and I was at the point where I could look at the pile and I could guess what the temperature was going to be when I stuck it in. I was just really kind of loving it. And this is also a really good, this is Institute of Local Self-Reliance. So this is excellent in regards to the height of the pile. And you'll hear browns and greens. Browns is carbon and greens is nitrogen. And you could really deep dive into some people get real picky on the carbon versus the nitrogen. And I'd be more than happy, because I really want to learn all levels. So anyone that wants to go down that road, I'll go with you. And so like when they list chipped wood, well, be very careful. Don't, not chemically treated and not diseased. And so there's a whole, so I really would like to come up with even better composting talk on this, better summaries, because I just, like I said, I was just surprised at the lack of caveats. For instance, human or animal hair. There's plenty of places say absolutely not, because too often your animal hair, you might have just treated it with something to get rid of whatever. And human hair, especially if you just got your hair dyed, who knows? I go to an organic place, but I'm still hesitant on that. But like I said, there's a big caveat. But again, percentage wise, if you see it, and that's the other thing, if you see your compost piles in the hot phase, you could actually toss more in. So that's the other, and I've gone through these before as far as why compost is so important. So here's my be careful list. Take the stickers off of the fruits and veggies. Even, it's basically, a lot of them are okay if you end up eating them. They're food safe, but they basically, to be blunt, say that they know it'll just come out the other end because it's not going to be digested. So I know I get compost from Black Earth, and sometimes when I'm spreading it, those darn stickers are still in the compost pile. So yeah, 20 years from now, it'll probably be gone, but do yourself a favor, just don't. And also there's a lot of places that say, oh, just check to see if your neighbors are going to be dropping off their leaves. It's like, oh, you'll better be careful of that. If you have, especially pay attention if you saw those signs for people to stay off their lawns, they're using chemicals. And let's see, eggshells. You'd think that they'd break down, but they actually don't break down too well. So it's best to crumble them up. And the other real key thing for really helping your compost is to break it up into much smaller pieces, like especially like banana peels. So a key thing for compost do's and don'ts. So clippings tend to be compacted, which inhibits the airflow. Adding inoculants can be done via certain finished compost and the biodynamic compost starter, which I'll briefly show. And a lot of these that are mentioned that don't do for many backyard, I say 2/3 of them you could actually do for a pickup service. So keep that in mind, because I've seen heads spin as far as, but why? It's all about how they manage it, and they have much bigger piles there, so that the inside temperatures can deal with a lot more. And I have a whole list on troubleshooting. If it's not heating up at all, then you probably don't have enough nitrogen. So grass clippings, manure, again, really like just chicken manure, or compost, finished compost that has cow manure in it, or food scraps. And of course, as you can imagine, the fruit scraps are the moist, has the most water in it. So if you follow the 4 tenets of balancing the air, the water, the carbon, and the nitrogen, you won't have all these symptoms. Trying to think. Okay, so here is the inoculant that I will report back to you on how it is, because like I said, my chin was just on the floor with how 3 drastically different places, one in 1992 and one just 2 weeks ago, said these seem to be the best ones. Because I read for you guys, I read this like 30-page report, and said that be careful, sometimes the inoculants don't work. And Europe is coming up with a law where they're getting a lot stricter on it. But this is, and there's, you know, a gazillion different types, but I love the fact that they came back that in order, again, we're back to the basics. In order for the inoculants to be effective, you have to have a base mixture going on. So you have to have a diversity of organisms, and you have to have a biodiversity of nutrients. And they should be consistent with the natural ecological processes. And okay, so here, yeah, this is this standard sustainable agriculture practices will likely enhance the benefits provided by microbial inoculants. So if you don't have these practices, then you're not going to see as big as an effect. If you haven't drastically reduced the pesticides, if you haven't reduced the tillage, if you haven't been over applying the fertilizers or manure, and that's the other thing. Even manure can be too much. So there's a happy medium, my mom used to always say. And there we go, enhancing plant biodiversity. So the old monocrop, when there's been places that, well, we tried that inoculant, and it's like, well, all you have is corn out there on degraded land. It's, you know, it's like you're putting a spoonful in horrible stuff. And ensuring that a crop is growing or has a root in the ground throughout the year. That's the other, it's just very, very powerful. So that's pretty much it. There's plenty I could go deep dive on, but any questions or?
Carol, there are plenty of questions in the chat. If people are still around with those questions, you can ask Carol directly.
I have a question is, I was going to do just a hardware cloth, 15-foot, you know, and make a round circle. And do I need to put like cardboard down on the ground, or do I need to put anything on the ground?
The cloth,
Well, it's a wire. It's like a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch wire roll that's 3 feet by 15 feet. I'm going low budget here.
Carol, you're on mute.
is because actually a real key thing that I've learned is to the fabric for especially like they attempted to, I'm sorry, the irony here is just crazy. Some hills you'll see the fabric, and that is not the best way because it doesn't allow the roots to go down deeper. It hurts the, doesn't allow the earthworms to move around. And they basically figured out that, as you mentioned, cardboard is the best thing to put down because it eventually will break down and will allow the roots to go down. And you plant a bunch of perennials so that the timing, the roots will start going down just as the cardboard is starting to go away, so that it will definitely help. So
Do I
So
want something growing in my compost pile?
oh, I was going to say the other weeds is a big thing. If you have the time and the energy, there are strategies to deal with the weeds. If you know the weed well, then you could cut off the roots and you can cut off any of the seeds. But there are some weeds that you'd be really surprised where the seeds are actually hiding. And another way is to just leave them out in when you hot day and just have them just totally, absolutely annihilated and killed by the sun. So there's no way anything's living. Chop it up, then you could put it in. But it's just a very, very dangerous road to go down.
But most of those compost things, like if they're plastic, they're all encased, there's no bottom. That's the question. If you have an open compost bin, should you put down some kind of bottom?
Well, it all depends on your location, and it all depends on your comfort level as far as whether you're concerned that any type of rodent might get in. I know plenty of people that did it in areas and they didn't have to worry about it, because the other key trick is to have a higher percentage of the carbon and have your food scraps really try to make sure that they go in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And another key thing is dry out, well, the coffee grounds. They're an incredible odor. They'll take in some of the odors. So have that both mixed in with the food to reduce the odors, but also to, when you mix it in with, it's when it's too much moisture from the food scraps that's not being soaked up. So if you mix it right in with something that's going to soak it up, like the dried leaves, you'd be amazed at how much the odor goes away. But again, the coffee grounds also helps, and having it in the middle versus hanging out on the side so that they can smell it.
So Margot, for the construction cloth, you're going to want to have 2x4 corners.
Right.
Staple the construction cloth to the 2x4s. You don't want it moving around. You probably want.
I was just going to stake it with those 4-foot stake and just do a tie wrap kind of thing and stake it into the ground. They said, once you have enough, and I do have enough, I have a lot, it'll stay in place. That's what they said.
Yeah,
I was going to test it.
Once you have your compost material in it.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm always going to have something in it.
Yeah.
Where did you
Okay.
get the FIFA biodynamic?
Hmm.
Where did you purchase that from? Carol?
I try to remember. It had peaceful in the name. Something like Peaceful Organics or something. I can look it up and I can post it.
Thank you.
All right. So it's past 9:15. Almost 20 after. So I think we should wrap this up.
Were you going to do a survey or send a survey to people?
Yeah,
Actually, you know what? Someone just posted something was really important. The stuff that might get moldy. What I do is to store it inside in the refrigerator or even in the freezer, if you're not going to be taking it out every day, and that will reduce the moldiness. But if it does go moldy, it can go in. But again, percentage wise.
Yeah. All my food scraps are in the top tray of the drawer freezer for years. It's so convenient.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm gonna just send a survey out for June's episode, whether we want to continue on Zoom or maybe do it in Linda's yard or something like that. I think
Not at night, right?
Yeah. So, or whether we could do a live meeting at another time, not an episode night. But I'll send it out to the larger group. You get a much better response, a wider response. So, one thing about starting at 7:30 is we're ending at 9 or after 9. So it's, I think this has been great. I'm glad you all came. I think we're going to have a lot more exciting things for the next time. Some real live plants, real live growing things. And I hope you can make it.
Okay.
Quick note, I just added the Kiss the Ground compost story, 6-minute video.
Right.
Okay, so we're gonna pass all of those videos and references and everything to Margot, and she'll post it on our website. Thank you. Thanks for sticking with us tonight.
People can, yeah, okay. I want to start having people, I want to have people to start posting directly. I don't want to do everything. So I'll teach anyone who wants to learn.
I'll
Alright.
learn.
All
Okay,
right.
great.
Send out the Margot, put the website address on the chat.
Okay. Whoops. WFM, don't leave everyone, wait. Whoops, gotta spell it right. Okay. That's it. I posted.
you.
Should work.
Okay.
Fred,
Yeah.
how many do we have in the wider circle?
We're getting close to 70.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good
night.
night. Thank you.
Hi, thanks to all.
Thank you, great meeting.
So much. Yeah, really great.